The silence on the other end of the phone line stretched for what felt like an eternity. I watched the seconds tick by on my laptop screen. 11:47 p.m. on March 15th. My birthday. The birthday my mother had, once again, completely forgotten. "Oh, honey," she finally said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of distracted obligation. "I've been so busy with the charity gala planning. You know how these events consume my entire life." A pause. "When is your birthday again?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Not what day is your birthday. Not I'm sorry I missed it. But when is your birthday again? As if my birth date was some trivial piece of information she couldn't be bothered to retain. I was 32 years old, and my mother still couldn't remember the date I came into this world. "It's today, Mom. It was today. It's almost over now." "Oh," another pause. "Well, happy birthday, sweetheart. I'll send you something nice." The casual dismissal in her voice crystallized something cold and sharp inside my chest. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't busy scheduling. This was willful indifference wrapped in the convenient excuse of being too important to remember her own daughter's existence. I hung up without saying goodbye. Sitting in my apartment, engagement ring catching the lamplight, I made a decision that would change everything. Jake was sleeping in the bedroom, blissfully unaware that his future mother-in-law had just delivered the final blow to whatever relationship she thought she had with me. Tomorrow, I would start planning our wedding, and my mother would learn about it the same way everyone else would, when she received her invitation in the mail. If she could forget I existed for 32 years, she could miss the most important day of my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This pattern didn't begin with a forgotten birthday. It began the day I was born. Growing up as Margaret Chen Morrison's daughter meant learning to orbit around someone else's son. My mother was, and still is, a force of nature in our small Connecticut town. President of the Historical Society, chair of 3 different charity boards, organizer of the annual spring gala that draws donors from 3 counties. She moves through the world with the confidence of someone who has never questioned her own importance, never doubted that her priorities are the right priorities, never considered that her schedule might not be the center of everyone else's universe. I learned early that my needs, my feelings, my very existence were secondary to whatever cause had captured her attention that month. When I was 7 and broke my arm falling from a tree, she sent our housekeeper Maria to the hospital because she couldn't miss the library fundraiser committee meeting. When I won the state science fair at 12, she was in Hartford lobbying for historic building preservation and asked me to tell her all about it later, then never asked again. The birthday forgetting started when I turned 10. She'd been planning the charity auction for weeks, consumed by vendor coordination and donor outreach. March 15th came and went without acknowledgement. When I finally worked up the courage to mention it 3 days later, she gasped dramatically and covered her face with perfectly manicured hands. "Oh, darling, Mommy is so sorry. I've been so overwhelmed with the auction. You understand, don't you? This event raises money for children who don't have the advantages you do." Even at 10, I recognized the manipulation in her apology. My disappointment was reframed as selfishness. Her neglect became a lesson in gratitude. I was supposed to feel grateful that other children were being helped by her important work, ashamed that I had wanted something as trivial as birthday recognition from my own mother. The pattern became predictable. Forgotten birthday, dramatic apology, guilt-inducing explanation about her charitable work, expensive gift delivered by someone else, and the implicit expectation that I should be grateful for her sacrifice on behalf of humanity. Every year, the gifts got more expensive and the apologies more elaborate, but the core message remained the same. I was not important enough to remember. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, she arrived 20 minutes late because she'd been on a conference call about the fall gala. When I graduated college summa cum laude, she spent the entire reception networking with other parents about their charitable contributions. When I got my first promotion at the marketing firm, she listened for exactly 30 seconds before launching into a story about the state senator who'd just joined her land conservation board. I learned to stop telling her about my achievements. I learned to stop expecting her presence at important moments. I learned to build a life that didn't require her validation or attention. And somehow, in the process of learning all these survival skills, I convinced myself that I had made peace with having a mother who couldn't see me. The irony is that I became successful partly because of her neglect. With no parental support to rely on, I developed an almost fierce independence. I put myself through college with scholarships and part time jobs. I built a career in digital marketing through sheer determination and networking. I cultivated friendships with people who actually showed up when they said they would. I learned to create the stability and reliability in my own life that my mother had never provided. By the time I met Jake 3 years ago, I had constructed what I thought was a complete life. I had a beautiful apartment, a thriving career, wonderful friends, and hobbies that fulfilled me. I told myself I didn't need anything from my mother anymore. I visited her twice a year, Christmas and her birthday, maintained polite conversation, and kept our relationship at a manageable distance. But there's a difference between making peace with neglect and truly healing from it. And there's a difference between not needing someone and not being hurt when they demonstrate over and over again that you don't matter to them. Jake saw through my carefully constructed detachment almost immediately. He noticed how my shoulders tensed whenever my phone rang and my mother's name appeared on the screen. He observed the way I would spend days preparing for those biannual visits, agonizing over what to wear and what to say, only to come home deflated and quiet. He watched me explain away her behavior with the same practiced phrases I'd been using for decades. She's very busy. Her work is important. She doesn't mean anything by it. Sweetheart, he said gently one evening after I'd hung up from a particularly frustrating conversation with her. People make time for what matters to them. Your mother chooses not to make time for you. That's not about how busy she is. That's about what she values. His words cut through 22 years of my own psychological protective mechanisms in a single sentence. All those explanations I'd crafted, all those justifications I'd rehearsed, they were just elaborate defense systems I'd built to avoid confronting the simple, devastating truth. My mother didn't prioritize me because she didn't value me. But even that realization didn't prepare me for the phone call that would finally break something irreparable inside me. The engagement happened on a Tuesday in February. Jake proposed during a quiet dinner at our favorite restaurant, the one where we'd had our first date. No flash mob, no public spectacle, just the two of us and a ring that reflected exactly how well he knew me. Vintage setting, ethically sourced stone, elegant without being ostentatious. I said yes before he finished his speech. We called our families that night. Jake's parents squealed with delight and immediately started planning their visit to celebrate with us. His sister sent a congratulatory text within minutes, followed by 3 more texts full of heart emojis and exclamation points. His grandmother, who we'd called on speakerphone, actually cried with happiness. I waited until the next day to call my mother. "That's wonderful, darling," she said when I told her the news. Her voice carried the same tone she used when I told her about a successful client presentation or a promotion. Pleased but distracted, already thinking about the next thing on her agenda. "Jake seems like a lovely young man. When are you thinking of having the wedding?" "We're not sure yet. Probably this fall." "Oh, that's perfect. The spring gala will be over by then, and I won't be in the thick of planning next year's event yet. Just make sure you check with me before you set a date. I have some conflicts coming up that I'll need to work around." I should have expected it. Of course my wedding date would need to accommodate her social calendar. Of course my once-in-a-lifetime event would be scheduled around her charity obligations. But somehow, I had allowed myself to hope that this might be different. That perhaps my engagement would be important enough to warrant top priority, just this once. "I'll be sure to check with you," I heard myself saying, already falling back into the familiar pattern of managing her expectations and my own disappointment. "Wonderful. Oh, and darling, I hope you'll consider having the reception at the country club. I know the event coordinator there very well, and I'm sure I could get you a good deal. Plus, all the important families use that venue. It would be perfect for building Jake's business connections." Even my wedding was being reframed as a networking opportunity for her social circle. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with her offering advice I hadn't asked for and making suggestions that had nothing to do with what Jake and I actually wanted. She mentioned 3 times how impressed the right people would be with a country club wedding, suggested I consider hiring her favorite caterer. He owes me a favor from the Historic Society fundraiser, and reminded me that fall weddings needed to be booked at least a year in advance for the best venues. Not once did she ask what kind of wedding I envisioned. Not once did she inquire about my feelings, my dreams, my preferences. The conversation was entirely about logistics, appearances, and her own network of connections. After I hung up, Jake found me standing in our kitchen, staring out the window at nothing. "How did she take the news?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "About as well as expected," I said. "She's already planning my wedding for me." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you want?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than I intended. "No, it's not what I want at all." "Then we'll plan it ourselves," he said simply. "It's our wedding, not hers." In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Jake's casual certainty that our preferences mattered more than my mother's expectations was revolutionary. He wasn't suggesting we fight with her or argue about it. He was simply stating the obvious truth that somehow I had never fully grasped. This was our wedding, and we got to decide how it would happen. But I still wasn't ready for the final straw. That came 2 weeks later, on my birthday. March 15th started like any other day. Jake had given me my gifts at breakfast, a first edition copy of my favorite novel and a weekend getaway to a cabin in Vermont that we'd been talking about visiting. My friends had sent sweet messages throughout the day. My coworkers had surprised me with cake during our afternoon meeting. But as evening approached, I found myself checking my phone obsessively, waiting for some acknowledgement from my mother. A text message, a voicemail, even an email. Anything that would indicate she remembered what day it was. Nothing came. At 8 p.m., I finally broke down and called her myself. "Hi, Mom, it's me." "Oh, hello, sweetheart. I'm so glad you called. I've been meaning to reach out about the wedding planning. I spoke with Caroline Henderson. You remember Caroline? She's on the hospital board with me. And she said her daughter's wedding at the country club was absolutely magnificent. I really think you should consider a—" "Mom," I interrupted, "do you know what today is?" There was a pause. I could practically hear her mentally shuffling through her calendar, trying to place the significance of March 15th. "It's Thursday?" she said uncertainly. "It's my birthday, Mom. Today is my birthday." The silence that followed was deafening. Not the silence of someone trying to remember something important they'd forgotten, but the silence of someone realizing they'd been caught in their own indifference. And then came the response that broke everything. "Oh, honey, I've been so busy with the charity gala planning. You know how these events consume my entire life? When is your birthday again? When is your birthday again?" 32 years of forgotten birthdays. 32 years of being second priority to every charitable cause, every social event, every networking opportunity that crossed her path. 32 years of making excuses for her, of convincing myself that her work was too important for her to remember trivial things like her daughter's existence. But this question, casual, thoughtless, revealing, exposed the truth I had been avoiding my entire life. She didn't forget my birthday because she was busy. She forgot it because she had never considered it worth remembering. She didn't know when my birthday was because she had never cared enough to commit it to memory. I was not a person to her. I was an obligation, a social expectation, a box to check on her list of maternal duties, right between charity gala planning and historic society meeting. "It's today, Mom. It was today. It's almost over now." "Oh, well, happy birthday, sweetheart. I'll send you something nice." The casual dismissal in her voice was like a physical slap. No apology, no embarrassment, no recognition that she had hurt me. Just a breezy promise to outsource some gift buying to her assistant, as if that could somehow compensate for 32 years of not caring enough to remember the day I was born. I hung up without saying goodbye. Jake found me sitting on our couch 20 minutes later, engagement ring twisted around my finger, staring at my phone with an expression he'd never seen before. "What happened?" he asked, settling beside me with the cautious care of someone approaching a wounded animal. "She forgot my birthday. Again." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, emotionless, like I was reporting the weather. And when I told her what day it was, she asked when my birthday is. Not what day. When. As in, she doesn't actually know when I was born. Jake's face went through several expressions: surprise, anger, something that looked like protective fury. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle. I'm so sorry, love. I'm done, I said quietly. I'm done making excuses for her. I'm done pretending this is normal. I'm done waiting for her to care about me. What do you want to do? I looked down at my engagement ring, thinking about the conversation we'd had 2 weeks earlier. Our wedding. Our choice. Our life that we got to build exactly the way we wanted. I want to plan our wedding, I said, and I want to do it without her input, without her interference, and without her knowledge. I want her to find out about our wedding the same way everyone else will when she gets the invitation. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Are you sure? That's a pretty big step. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And as I said it, I realized it was true. The decision felt like stepping into a cold, clear stream after years of walking through fog. If she can forget I exist for 32 years, she can miss the most important day of my life. Then that's what we'll do, Jake said simply. We'll plan the most beautiful wedding for us. And when it's perfect, we'll send out the invitations. That night, I blocked my mother's number. Not permanently, I wasn't ready for that level of severance yet, but temporarily, giving myself space to think clearly without the constant possibility of her disrupting my mental peace with another thoughtless call. Then I started planning the wedding I actually wanted. Planning a wedding without my mother's input was like learning to breathe with both lungs for the first time. Jake and I spent the next morning in bed with coffee and laptops, researching venues that had nothing to do with country clubs or her social connections. We looked at art galleries, historic inns, botanical gardens, and mountain lodges. We made Pinterest boards and bookmark folders, discussed color schemes and seasonal flowers, debated between plated dinners and family-style serving. For the first time in my life, I was making major decisions based purely on what brought me joy, without any consideration for what would impress my mother's social circle or advance her networking agenda. It was intoxicating. We found our venue within a week, a renovated barn on a working flower farm about 2 hours north of the city. The space was rustic but elegant, with exposed wooden beams and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked rolling fields of wildflowers. The owners, Sarah and Marcus, were a couple in their 50s who had left corporate careers to pursue sustainable farming and event hosting. They offered wedding packages that included fresh flowers from their fields, organic catering from local farms, and accommodations in charming cottages scattered across the property. It was everything my mother would have hated. Too rural, too unconventional, too far from the social epicenter of our Connecticut hometown. The guest accommodations were cozy rather than luxurious. The dining would be family style rather than formally plated. And the overall aesthetic was rustic elegance rather than country club sophistication. It was absolutely perfect. October 14th, Sarah told us, scrolling through her booking calendar. We have that Saturday available. It's peak foliage season, so the backdrop will be stunning. Jake and I exchanged glances. We had been hoping for an October wedding, but hadn't dared hope for such a perfect date. We'll take it, I said without hesitation. Wonderful. Let me walk you through our package options. Over the next hour, Sarah outlined everything included in their wedding packages. Fresh flower arrangements designed around seasonal blooms from their fields. A cocktail hour in their rustic chic tasting room. Dinner featuring ingredients sourced from local organic farms. Dancing in the main barn under string lights and hanging florals. Overnight accommodations for the wedding party in their renovated farmhouse cottages. It was intimate, authentic, and completely opposite to everything my mother had been suggesting. Instead of impressing her social network, our wedding would celebrate our actual values: sustainability, authenticity, community, natural beauty. Instead of a networking event disguised as a celebration, it would be a true reflection of who Jake and I were as a couple. When do you need the final guest count? Jake asked. 6 weeks before the wedding, Sarah replied. So early September for your October date. I felt a small thrill of rebellion as I realized the timeline. If we sent invitations in mid-August, my mother would have exactly 4 weeks to process the fact that I had planned an entire wedding without her input. 4 weeks to realize that her opinion had not been solicited, her preferences had not been considered, and her social calendar had not been consulted. 4 weeks to understand that I no longer needed her approval for the major decisions in my life. We signed the contract that afternoon. Over the following weeks, Jake and I threw ourselves into wedding planning with the enthusiasm of children playing an elaborate game. We tasted cakes at small local bakeries instead of the high-end caterers my mother preferred. We auditioned musicians who played indie folk and acoustic covers instead of the classical quartets she would have recommended. We designed invitations with hand-lettered fonts and botanical illustrations, instead of the formal engraved cards that graced every society wedding in her circle. Every choice felt like a small act of revolution. Every decision made without consulting her opinion felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't realized was missing. The guest list was where the rebellion became most apparent. Jake and I invited the people who had actually shown up in our lives, friends who remembered our birthdays, colleagues who celebrated our achievements, family members who had made effort to know us as individuals rather than social obligations. The final count was 87 people, including plus ones. My mother's name appeared on the list, of course. Despite everything, I wasn't ready to completely sever our relationship. But she was invited as a guest, not as a participant in the planning process. She would receive the same information as everyone else, with the same timeline as everyone else, with the same lack of input as everyone else. I also made one decision that felt simultaneously petty and deeply necessary. I changed my emergency contact information. For my entire adult life, my mother had been listed as my emergency contact for everything: medical records, employment paperwork, insurance policies, bank accounts. It was an automatic inclusion, a leftover from childhood that I had never thought to update. But as I updated our wedding vendor contracts and started thinking about our life together as a married couple, I realized how ridiculous it was to list someone as my emergency contact who couldn't even remember my birthday. If something happened to me, did I really want the first phone call to go to someone who might need to check her calendar to recall my name? I changed everything to list Jake as my primary emergency contact, with his parents as secondary contacts. My mother didn't even make the list. It was a small administrative change that no one would ever know about unless an actual emergency occurred. But for me, it represented something monumental: the formal acknowledgement that the people who truly cared about my well-being were the people who had earned that privilege through consistent presence and attention. The wedding planning continued through the spring and summer with a momentum that surprised me. Without the constant second-guessing and opinion managing that usually accompanied any interaction with my mother, decisions came easily. Jake and I discovered that we had very similar tastes when we weren't filtered through someone else's expectations. We both preferred natural beauty over formal elegance, intimate gatherings over large productions, meaningful details over impressive displays. By July, almost everything was finalized: the flowers, the music, the food, the accommodations, the transportation. I had found a dress at a small boutique that specialized in ethically made gowns. Nothing like the designer showrooms my mother would have insisted on, but perfect for the rustic elegance of our venue. Jake had chosen a suit from a local tailor who specialized in sustainable fabrics. All that remained was sending the invitations. I held off until August 15th, exactly 4 weeks before the October 14th wedding date. The invitations were beautiful, heavy cardstock with botanical illustrations, hand-lettered fonts, and wording that emphasized celebration and joy rather than formal social obligations. Each envelope was addressed by hand, each stamp was carefully placed, each invitation was slipped into the mail with a small thrill of anticipation. My mother's invitation was identical to everyone else's. Same paper, same wording, same timeline. The only difference was the slight tremor in my hands as I dropped her envelope into the mailbox, knowing that the next phase of our relationship, whatever that would look like, was about to begin. I unblocked her phone number that evening, then waited for the storm. The storm arrived exactly 48 hours later at 7:23 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Jake and I were having breakfast when my phone erupted with the sharp, insistent ringtone I had assigned to my mother's calls. "Answer it," Jake said quietly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. You've got this. I took a deep breath and swiped to accept the call. What? My mother's voice cut through the phone with crystalline precision. Is the meaning of this invitation? No hello, no pleasantries, no acknowledgement that we hadn't spoken in 5 months. Just immediate confrontation delivered with the imperious tone of someone accustomed to having her questions answered immediately and completely. Good morning, Mom, I said calmly. I assume you received our wedding invitation? I received something that appears to be a wedding invitation, yes. For a wedding that's apparently happening in 4 weeks. At some farm in the middle of nowhere, without any consultation with me whatsoever. Her voice carried the particular quality of outrage reserved for social slights and protocol violations. This wasn't hurt or disappointment. This was fury at having been excluded from a process she considered her rightful territory. That's correct, I said. Jake and I are getting married on October 14th at Blue Valley Flower Farm. Without discussing any of this with me, without asking for my input on the venue, the date, the catering, the guest list, without considering my schedule or my social obligations? The questions tumbled out in rapid succession, each one laced with increasing indignation. I could picture her pacing in her perfectly appointed home office, gesticulating with the same dramatic flair she brought to charity board meetings when someone dared to question her authority. We didn't need your input, Mom. It's our wedding. We planned what we wanted. The silence that followed was electric with rage. I am your mother, she said finally, her voice dropping to the tone she had used when I was a child and had committed some unforgivable breach of etiquette. I have every right to be involved in planning my daughter's wedding. This is completely inappropriate. There it was, the fundamental assumption that had governed our entire relationship. Her rights as my mother superseded my rights as an autonomous adult. Her preferences mattered more than mine. Her social calendar took precedence over my life events. Actually, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, you don't have any rights to my wedding planning. You have the right to be invited, which you were. You have the right to attend or decline, which is your choice, but you don't have the right to control or manage or organize someone else's wedding. Someone else's, she sputtered with what sounded like genuine shock. You are my daughter. Your wedding reflects on our entire family. What will people think when they hear that Margaret Chen Morrison's daughter got married at some unknown farm without proper planning or consultation? And there was the real issue. Not that she was hurt by being excluded from a meaningful mother-daughter experience, but that my choices might reflect poorly on her social standing. My wedding was important to her only insofar as it served as an extension of her own reputation and network. I don't really care what people think, Mom. The people who matter to us will be there to celebrate with us. Everyone else's opinions are irrelevant. How can you say that? These relationships matter. These connections are important for your future, for Jake's business, for your standing in the community. Whose community? I asked. I don't live in your town anymore. I don't move in your social circles. I don't need your networking connections. I've built my own life with my own relationships, and those are the people I want at my wedding. Another pause, this one stretching long enough that I wondered if she had hung up. I cannot believe, she said finally, that you would plan your entire wedding without me. After everything I've done for you, after all the opportunities I've provided, after all the connections I've made available to you, this is how you repay me? By completely shutting me out of one of the most important events in your life? The manipulation was so familiar, I could have recited it from memory. My ingratitude for her sacrifices, my failure to appreciate her contributions, my selfishness in prioritizing my own preferences over her generous offers of assistance. But something had shifted in me over the past 5 months. The words that once would have sent me spiraling into guilt and self-doubt now sounded hollow and rehearsed. I'm not shutting you out, Mom. You're invited to the wedding. You're welcome to come and celebrate with us. But I'm not apologizing for planning my own wedding the way I want it. This is ridiculous, she snapped. We need to meet and discuss this properly. I'm coming to the city this weekend. We'll have lunch and sort this out. The assumption that she could simply command my presence and reorganize my life to suit her schedule was so characteristic that I almost smiled. I'm not available this weekend, I said. Jake and I have plans. Cancel them. This is more important. No, it's not. And no, I won't. The silence that followed was charged with a quality I had never heard before. The silence of someone who had just discovered that their usual tools of control no longer worked. I see, she said finally, her voice cold enough to freeze glass. I see exactly what this is about. You've decided to punish me for some imagined slight, and you're using your wedding as the weapon. This is incredibly childish behavior. This isn't punishment, Mom. This is just me living my own life without requiring your permission or management. Don't be ridiculous. You clearly need management. Look at this venue you've chosen. Some farm in the middle of nowhere that none of our friends have ever heard of. Look at this timeline. 4 weeks' notice. As if this is some casual backyard barbecue instead of a proper wedding. You obviously don't understand the complexity of planning an appropriate celebration. Her voice was gaining momentum now, settling into the familiar rhythm of condescension and correction that had characterized most of our interactions for the past decade. I've already planned the wedding, Mom. It's organized, it's paid for, and it's happening in 4 weeks exactly as we intended. This is unacceptable, she said. I'm calling the venue to discuss moving the date to something more reasonable. We need at least 6 months to plan a proper wedding, and we need to look at more appropriate locations. The audacity of the statement took my breath away. She was planning to call my wedding venue and attempt to change my wedding date without my consent. Mom, I said, my voice still calm but carrying a new edge of finality. If you call my venue, if you contact any of my vendors, if you interfere with my wedding planning in any way, you will not be attending my wedding at all. You can't be serious. I have never been more serious about anything in my life. Another long pause. I think, she said slowly, you need some time to think about this conversation. You're obviously upset about something, and you're not thinking clearly. When you're ready to have a mature discussion about planning an appropriate wedding, you can call me. And with that, she hung up. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and looked at Jake, who had been listening to the entire conversation with an expression of barely contained amazement. Well, he said finally, that went about as expected. She's going to try to call the venue, I said. She's going to try to change our wedding date. No, she's not, Jake said confidently, because you're going to call Sarah right now and give her a heads up. And Sarah is going to tell your mother exactly what she told us, that changes to confirmed bookings require written authorization from the contracting parties, which are you and me. I stared at him. You think it's going to be that simple? I think your mother has been getting away with controlling your life because you've never set firm boundaries before. But now you have. And she's going to test those boundaries to see if you really mean it. He reached across the table and took my hand. The question is, do you mean it? I thought about the past 5 months, the peace I had felt while planning our wedding, the joy of making decisions based on our actual preferences, the relief of not having to manage someone else's expectations or navigate around someone else's schedule. Yes, I said, I mean it. I called Sarah immediately and explained the situation. She was wonderfully understanding and assured me that no changes could be made to our booking without written authorization from both Jake and me. She also mentioned that this was not the first time she had dealt with overbearing family members attempting to hijack wedding plans, and she had protocols in place to handle such situations. Over the next 2 weeks, my mother made 3 more attempts to take control of our wedding planning. She called the venue twice. Both times, Sarah politely informed her that she was not authorized to make any changes to our booking. She attempted to contact our caterer, who referred her back to us as the contracting parties. She even tried to reach out to Jake directly, leaving him a voicemail that was equal parts guilt trip and social networking pitch. Jake listened to the voicemail once, then deleted it without calling her back. I'm not getting in the middle of this, he told me. This is between you and her. I'll support whatever boundaries you set, but I'm not going to be her backdoor into our wedding planning. With each failed attempt to reassert control, my mother's communications became more desperate and manipulative. She sent text messages about how hurt she was. She left voicemails about how my behavior was affecting her reputation in the community. She even reached out to my college roommate, whom she had barely acknowledged during the 4 years we lived together, trying to get information about whether I was going through some kind of crisis. But the most telling communication came 3 weeks before the wedding, an email with the subject line, "Final attempt at reconciliation." Darling, I've been thinking a great deal about our recent conversations, and I believe I understand what's happening here. You're feeling overwhelmed by wedding planning, and you're taking out your stress on me. This is completely normal. Many brides experience pre wedding anxiety and lash out at their closest family members. I'm willing to overlook your recent behavior and step in to help salvage this situation. I've spoken with Caroline Henderson about having your reception at the country club instead of that farm. She can arrange a beautiful event on short notice if we act quickly. I've also reached out to my preferred caterer and florist. They owe me favors from the spring gala, so they're willing to accommodate the tight timeline. All you need to do is call me and apologize for your recent childishness, and we can fix this whole mess together. I know you'll thank me later for preventing you from making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life. With love and patience, Mother. The email was a masterpiece of manipulation, reframing my boundary setting as pre wedding hysteria, positioning herself as the magnanimous rescuer, offering to fix a wedding that wasn't broken, and requiring my apology and submission as the price of her assistance. 6 months earlier, an email like this would have sent me spiraling into self doubt. I would have questioned my own judgment, wondered if she was right about the venue being inappropriate, worried that I was making a mistake that would embarrass our families. But now, reading her words with clear eyes, I felt nothing but pity for someone so desperate to maintain control that she would sabotage her own daughter's happiness to preserve her own sense of importance. I deleted the email without responding. 2 weeks before the wedding, a package arrived at our apartment. Inside was a wedding gift from my mother, an elaborate silver tea service that had been in her family for 3 generations. The accompanying note read, "For your new home. I hope you'll think of family tradition when you use it." Even her gift was a manipulation, a heavy, expensive obligation that came with the implicit expectation of gratitude and the explicit reminder of family tradition and my place within it. I put the tea service in our closet without unpacking it. But the most surprising development in the final weeks before our wedding wasn't my mother's escalating attempts at control. It was the introduction of someone who would completely reframe my understanding of what maternal support could look like. I met Helen Morrison, Jake's aunt, at our rehearsal dinner. She had flown in from Portland for the wedding, and Jake had warned me that she was a bit different from the rest of his family. What he hadn't prepared me for was how immediately and completely she would fill a space in my life I hadn't even realized was empty. Helen was in her early 60s, with silver hair that she wore in a practical bob and laugh lines that suggested a lifetime of genuine joy. She was a retired high school English teacher who had never married, choosing instead to travel extensively and maintain close relationships with her 7 nieces and nephews. She had taught in inner-city schools for 40 years, volunteered with literacy programs in her retirement, and spoke with the kind of warmth and directness that immediately put people at ease. "You must be Emma," she said when Jake introduced us, pulling me into a hug that felt like coming home. "I've heard so much about you, and every word has been glowing." "Jake's told me wonderful things about you, too," I replied. "Oh, he's a good boy, but he's biased. I'm much more interesting than he makes me sound." She winked at Jake, who rolled his eyes affectionately. "Now tell me about this beautiful farm venue. Jake says you planned the whole wedding yourselves." Something in her tone, genuinely interested, warmly approving, made me realize how unusual it was to have an adult express authentic enthusiasm for our choices without any underlying agenda or criticism. "We did," I said, and found myself telling her about the flower farm, about Sarah and Marcus, about our decision to prioritize sustainability and authenticity over traditional formality. Helen listened with the kind of focused attention that made me feel like every word I said was important to her. She asked thoughtful questions about our vendors, expressed genuine delight at our choice to support local farms, and praised us for creating a celebration that reflected our actual values. "That sounds absolutely perfect," she said when I finished describing our plans. "You know, the best weddings I've ever attended have been the ones where you could really see the couple's personality in every detail. It sounds like you two have created something truly meaningful." It was such a simple statement, but it carried a validation I hadn't realized I was craving. Here was an adult, someone with decades of life experience, someone who had attended dozens of weddings, someone with the wisdom to distinguish between meaningful celebration and empty social performance. telling me that our choices were not just acceptable but admirable. Your mother must be so proud, Helen continued. What a gift to have a daughter who knows her own mind so clearly. The innocuous comment landed like a physical blow. I felt my face change, and Helen immediately noticed. Oh dear, she said gently. Did I say something wrong? Jake appeared at my elbow with the protective instinct that had become second nature over the past 6 months. Emma's mother hasn't been very supportive of our wedding plans, he said diplomatically. Helen's expression shifted into something I had never seen directed toward a mother's behavior: disappointment that bordered on disapproval. What do you mean, not supportive? She asked. I found myself telling her the whole story: the forgotten birthdays, the assumption that our wedding should accommodate her social calendar, the attempts to interfere with our vendors, the manipulative emails about fixing our mistakes. Helen listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. Oh, sweetheart, she said when I finished. I am so sorry. That must be incredibly painful. The simple acknowledgement of my pain, without qualification, without explanation, without suggestion that I should understand my mother's perspective, was like a dam breaking. I felt tears I didn't know I was holding back start to spill over. I keep thinking I should feel worse about excluding her from the planning, I said. I keep waiting to feel guilty or regret the decision, but mostly I just feel relieved. Of course you feel relieved, Helen said firmly. You've spent your entire life managing someone else's emotions and expectations instead of focusing on your own happiness. Relief is the natural response to finally putting yourself first. She spoke with such matter-of-fact certainty that I felt something settle inside my chest. This wasn't a character flaw or a sign of selfishness. This was the healthy response to an unhealthy dynamic. Can I tell you something? Helen continued. I've been Jake's aunt for 28 years. I've watched him grow up, supported him through difficult times, celebrated his achievements, and worried about his happiness. And in all that time, I have never seen him as genuinely content as he's been since he met you. She placed a gentle hand on my arm. Whatever happened between you and your mother, whatever mistakes she made or boundaries she crossed, none of that changes the fact that you are a remarkable young woman who deserves to be loved and supported unconditionally. Jake sees that. I see that. Anyone who truly knows you sees that. Thank you, I whispered, not trusting my voice for anything more substantial. Now, Helen said briskly, switching back to her practical tone. Tomorrow is your wedding day, the most important day in your relationship so far. I want you to wake up thinking about nothing but joy and celebration and the wonderful life you're building with my nephew. Everything else is background noise. That evening, Helen sought me out again during the rehearsal dinner festivities. I hope you don't mind, she said, but I wanted to give you something. She handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a delicate vintage bracelet with a beautiful antique clasp. This was my grandmother's, she explained. She gave it to me when I was about your age, with the instruction that I should pass it along to someone special when the time was right. I never had daughters of my own, but I've been waiting for the right moment to share this. I stared at the bracelet, overwhelmed by the generosity of the gesture. This woman, whom I had met just hours earlier, was offering me a family heirloom, not because of obligation or tradition, but because she genuinely cared about my happiness. Helen, I can't accept this. It's too precious. Nonsense, she said firmly. My grandmother believed that jewelry should be worn and loved, not stored in a box waiting for some theoretical perfect occasion. Besides, she added with a smile, I have a feeling you're going to be part of this family for a very long time. The bracelet was perfect with my wedding dress, delicate enough to complement rather than compete with my other jewelry, vintage enough to echo the antique elements in my engagement ring, meaningful enough to carry the love and support I had always wanted from an older female relative. There's one more thing, Helen said as I fastened the bracelet around my wrist. I know tomorrow might be difficult, having your mother there after everything that's happened. If you need someone to run interference or if you just need a friendly face in the crowd, I'll be right there. You don't have to manage her emotions on your wedding day. The offer was so thoughtful, so perfectly attuned to my actual needs that I nearly started crying again. I don't know how to thank you, I said. You don't need to thank me, sweetheart. This is what family does for each other. As I got ready for bed that night, I thought about Helen's words. This is what family does for each other: unconditional support, thoughtful attention to someone else's needs, genuine celebration of their happiness, protection from people who would cause them pain. It was everything I had always wanted from my mother, offered freely by someone who had known me for less than 24 hours. My wedding day dawned crisp and clear with the kind of brilliant October light that makes everything look like it's been touched by magic. I woke up in one of the farmhouse cottages surrounded by my closest friends who had stayed overnight to help me get ready. The morning felt like a celebration from the very first moment. Breakfast in bed, mimosas on the cottage porch, leisurely preparations that focused on joy rather than perfection. Jake was getting ready in a cottage on the other side of the property, following the tradition of not seeing each other before the ceremony. But he had arranged for a coffee and pastry delivery to my cottage, along with a note that read, "For the most beautiful bride in the world, see you at the altar. All my love, your almost husband." My mother's absence from the morning preparations was so complete that I almost forgot she would be attending the ceremony. None of my friends mentioned her. They had all heard enough about our relationship over the years to understand that her lack of involvement was a blessing rather than a loss. Instead, they focused on making sure I felt celebrated, supported, and radiantly happy. Helen arrived at my cottage around noon carrying a beautifully wrapped gift. "From Jake's parents," she explained. "They wanted to make sure you had something blue." Inside was a pair of vintage sapphire earrings that had belonged to Jake's grandmother. The accompanying note from his parents read, "Welcome to the family with all our love." The contrast was stark and painful. Jake's family, people who had known me for 3 years, had gone out of their way to make me feel welcomed and cherished. They had thought carefully about meaningful gifts, taken time to write personal notes, and made effort to contribute to my happiness on my wedding day. My own mother, who had known me for 32 years, had contributed nothing but stress and manipulation. "These are gorgeous," I said, holding up the earrings to catch the light. "They'll be perfect with your dress," Helen agreed. "Now, let me help you get ready. I have some experience with pre-wedding hair and makeup from my teaching days. You'd be amazed how many of my students ask me to help them get ready for prom." Helen had brought her own makeup kit and proved to have a surprisingly deft touch with hairstyling. As she worked, she kept up a steady stream of warm conversation. Stories about Jake's childhood, questions about our honeymoon plans, observations about the beautiful farm setting. "You know," she said, as she finished pinning the last few pieces of my hair into place, "I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday, about your mother's behavior." I tensed slightly, worried that she was going to offer advice about reconciliation or suggest that I should try to understand my mother's perspective. "I want you to know," Helen continued, "that what she's done to you, the years of neglect, the forgotten birthdays, the attempts to control your wedding, none of that is normal maternal behavior. I've worked with thousands of families over the years, and healthy mothers don't treat their daughters the way she's treated you." She met my eyes in the mirror. "I'm telling you this because I know how easy it is to normalize dysfunction when it's all you've ever known. But sweetheart, you deserved so much better than what she gave you." "Thank you," I said quietly. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being too harsh, or if I should try harder to make things work with her. "No," Helen said firmly. "You've tried hard enough for 32 years. You've made excuses for her, managed her expectations, and sacrificed your own needs to maintain a relationship with someone who has never reciprocated that effort. You don't owe her any more chances." She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Today is about celebrating the family you're choosing. Jake, his parents, his siblings, all the people who show up for you consistently and love you unconditionally. That's what real family looks like." At 2 p.m., I put on my wedding dress, a flowing creation in ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves and a train that pooled elegantly behind me. The dress fit perfectly, felt comfortable enough to dance in, and reflected exactly the aesthetic Jake and I had envisioned for our wedding. Looking at myself in the full-length mirror, I felt beautiful, confident, and ready to marry the man I loved. My friends gathered around for photos, and Helen stepped back to give us space while still being available for anything I might need. The dynamic felt so natural, so supportive, that I almost forgot there was supposed to be another woman in the room, someone whose opinion was supposed to matter more than anyone else's, someone whose approval was supposed to be essential to my happiness. At 3:30, we made our way to the ceremony site, a meadow overlooking the flower fields decorated with simple wooden archways and arrangements of seasonal blooms. Guests were already seated in rustic wooden chairs arranged in a semicircle, creating an intimate atmosphere that encouraged community and celebration. I could see Jake waiting at the altar with his groomsmen, looking impossibly handsome in his navy suit and smiling like he couldn't contain his joy. The sight of him, my partner, my best friend, my future husband, made everything else fade into insignificance. The ceremony was everything we had hoped for. Our officiant was a close friend who had known us as a couple from the beginning, and he spoke about our relationship with warmth and humor that had our guests laughing and crying in equal measure. We had written our own vows, and speaking those words to each other in front of everyone we loved felt like the most natural thing in the world. My mother was there, sitting in the third row on the bride's side, dressed impeccably and maintaining the kind of composed expression she wore to charity galas and board meetings. She looked like she was attending a social obligation rather than celebrating her daughter's wedding. But for the first time in my life, her emotional distance didn't affect my happiness. I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my joy, and her lack of enthusiasm was simply irrelevant. The ceremony concluded with Jake and me being pronounced husband and wife, and the kiss that sealed our marriage was met with cheers and applause from everyone who mattered to us. As we walked back down the aisle together, I caught Helen's eye and saw her wiping away tears of joy. The reception was magical, exactly the kind of celebration Jake and I had envisioned. Cocktail hour in the flower fields, dinner under string lights in the barn, dancing to music that actually meant something to us. Our guests mingled easily, creating the kind of warm community atmosphere that comes from bringing together people who genuinely like each other. I barely spoke to my mother during the reception. She spent most of the evening at her table, making polite conversation with other guests, but maintaining the aloof demeanor of someone who didn't quite approve of the proceedings. A few times I saw her checking her phone, which suggested she was either managing other obligations or simply not fully present at my wedding. It didn't matter. I was too busy being happy to worry about her lack of engagement. The highlight of the evening came during the toast. Jake's father spoke about how proud they were to welcome me into their family. My college roommate shared funny stories about our friendship and expressed her joy at seeing me so happy. Helen stood up and gave a toast that made the entire room tear up. She spoke about love, commitment, and the beauty of finding someone who sees your true self and cherishes it completely. And then, unexpectedly, my mother stood up. "I'd like to say a few words," she announced, moving toward the microphone with the confidence of someone accustomed to public speaking. My stomach dropped. We hadn't discussed her giving a toast, and given the state of our relationship, I couldn't imagine what she might say. I caught Jake's eye across the room and saw my own concern reflected in his expression. "Good evening, everyone," my mother began, her voice carrying the practiced warmth she used for charity events. "I'm Margaret Chen Morrison, Emma's mother." She paused, looking out over the assembled guests with the kind of smile she used when networking at social functions. "I have to say," she continued, "this wedding has been quite a surprise to me. The venue, the timing, the overall approach. None of it is what I would have planned for my daughter." A uncomfortable silence settled over the room. I felt heat rise in my cheeks and caught Helen making a subtle gesture that looked like she was preparing to stand up and intervene. "But," my mother continued, "as I've watched Emma and Jake today, I've realized something important. This wedding isn't about what I would have planned. It's about what they wanted to create together." She turned to look directly at Jake and me, and for a moment, her practiced expression seemed to soften into something that might have been genuine emotion. "Emma, you have always been a determined, independent young woman. Even as a child, you knew your own mind and pursued your own path. I'll admit that sometimes I found that challenging to navigate as your mother. The understatement was so massive, it would have been laughable if it weren't happening in front of all our wedding guests. But today, seeing you and Jake together, Seeing the life you've built and the celebration you've created, I can see that your independence has served you well. You've chosen a partner who appreciates your strength, you've built relationships with people who value your happiness, and you've created a wedding that truly reflects who you are. She raised her champagne glass. So let me toast Emma and Jake. May your marriage be filled with the same thoughtfulness, intentionality, and love that you've brought to this beautiful celebration. The room erupted in applause, and guests raised their glasses in response to what sounded like a genuinely heartfelt toast. But I sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. On the surface, my mother had given a lovely speech acknowledging our independence and expressing support for our choices. But underneath the gracious words, I heard something else entirely, a carefully crafted performance designed to rehabilitate her image in front of our guests. She had acknowledged that our wedding wasn't what she would have planned, but framed that as a positive realization rather than an admission of her attempts to interfere. She had mentioned my independence as a lifelong trait she had found challenging, but positioned herself as someone who had ultimately learned to appreciate it rather than someone who had actively undermined it for decades. Most tellingly, she had praised the relationships with people who value your happiness and the thoughtfulness and intentionality of our celebration, implicitly including herself among those supportive people, despite having contributed nothing but criticism and manipulation to our wedding planning process. It was a masterpiece of public relations, a speech that made her sound like a loving, evolved mother who had gracefully stepped back to allow her daughter's vision to flourish, rather than someone who had spent months trying to sabotage our plans when she couldn't control them. The guests who didn't know our history heard a touching mother of the bride speech. But I heard something far more calculating. My mother's final attempt to rewrite the narrative of our relationship for public consumption. After the applause died down and the reception continued, Helen appeared at my side. "Well," she said quietly, "that was quite a performance." "You heard it too?" I asked. "Oh, sweetheart, I've spent 40 years working with teenagers. I can spot a manipulative speech from across a crowded room." She squeezed my arm gently. "But you know what? It doesn't matter what she said or why she said it. What matters is that you had the wedding you wanted, surrounded by people who genuinely love you." She was right. My mother's toast couldn't retroactively change the months of wedding planning we had done without her interference. It couldn't undo the peace I had felt while making decisions based purely on our preferences. It couldn't alter the fact that our wedding had been exactly what Jake and I had envisioned. The reception continued until well past midnight, with dancing and laughter and the kind of joy that comes from bringing together people who genuinely care about each other. My mother left relatively early, citing a long drive home and an early morning commitment. Her departure was so low-key that many guests didn't even notice, which seemed fitting for someone who had contributed so little to the celebration. As Jake and I said goodbye to our guests and thanked everyone for celebrating with us, Helen was among the last to leave. "This was absolutely perfect," she told us, pulling us both into a warm hug. "Everything about today reflected who you are as a couple, and that's exactly what a wedding should do." "Thank you," I said, "for everything. For the bracelet, for your help getting ready, for just being here for me." "Thank you for letting me be part of this beautiful day," she replied. "And remember, you're family now. That means I'm always here if you need anything." As Jake and I finally made our way to our cottage, now officially married, exhausted, and blissfully happy, I reflected on the day. It had been everything we had hoped for: intimate, authentic, joyful, and completely reflective of our values and relationship. My mother's presence had been largely irrelevant to our happiness, and her absence from the planning process had been entirely beneficial to our peace of mind. The contrast between her performative toast and Helen's genuine warmth had only highlighted how little my mother actually understood about love, support, and what it meant to show up for someone else's joy. But the most important realization came as Jake and I fell asleep in each other's arms that night, officially married and surrounded by the lingering happiness of a perfect celebration. I no longer needed my mother's approval or participation to feel complete. I had built a life full of people who showed up consistently, loved unconditionally, and celebrated my happiness without reservation. And that life was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. The aftermath of our wedding revealed the true depth of my mother's self-centeredness in ways that surprised even me. 3 days after the wedding, while Jake and I were on our honeymoon in Vermont, I received a text message from her. "Darling, I've been thinking about your reception venue. I know the owners now, and I think Blue Valley Flower Farm would be perfect for the Historical Society's spring gala. Could you put me in touch with Sarah?" I stared at the message for a long moment, trying to process the audacity. My mother wanted to use our wedding venue, the place Jake and I had chosen specifically because it reflected our values and had nothing to do with her social circle, for her own networking and social events. She wasn't asking because she had genuinely fallen in love with the farm's mission or aesthetic. She was asking because she saw an opportunity to leverage my wedding for her own social benefit. Even our most personal, meaningful celebration had been reduced to a networking opportunity in her mind. I showed the message to Jake, who read it twice before shaking his head in amazement. "Does she have any awareness at all?" he asked. "Any recognition that this is inappropriate?" "I don't think she sees anything inappropriate about it," I replied. "I think she genuinely believes that my wedding vendors are now part of her extended network available for her use." I didn't respond to the text message. Instead, I called Sarah directly and gave her a heads up that my mother might contact her about using the farm for other events. Sarah laughed. Apparently, she had been expecting something like this. "We get this occasionally," she explained. "Family members who attend a wedding here and then want to book the venue for their own events, usually without understanding that we're very selective about the celebrations we host. Don't worry, if she calls, I'll handle it professionally." Sarah proved to be as good as her word. 2 days later, I received another text from my mother. "I spoke with your venue coordinator, and she says they're not accepting bookings for corporate events. I think there may have been some miscommunication. Could you call her and clarify that this would be for a nonprofit fundraiser?" The persistence was breathtaking. My mother had contacted our wedding venue, been told they weren't interested in hosting her event, and decided that the problem was a miscommunication that I should fix for her. I called her directly. "Mom, Sarah didn't miscommunicate anything. Blue Valley Flower Farm is selective about the events they host, and they're not interested in hosting your gala." "But surely if you explained the importance of the Historical Society's work—" "No," I interrupted. "I'm not going to use my relationship with our wedding vendors to benefit your social events. That's completely inappropriate. I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this. It's just a phone call." "It's not just a phone call, Mom. It's you trying to use my wedding as a networking opportunity for your own benefit." There was a pause. "I hardly think it's unreasonable for me to explore venues that I've now seen firsthand." "You didn't explore the venue, Mom. You attended my wedding there. Those are completely different things." She hung up without saying goodbye, a pattern that was becoming familiar whenever I declined to manage her expectations or solve her problems. But the venue incident was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, I discovered that my mother had been using our wedding as a networking and social currency in ways I hadn't anticipated. My friend Sarah, different Sarah, my college roommate, called to tell me that my mother had approached her at the reception to discuss marketing services for the Historical Society. My cousin mentioned that my mother had asked for Jake's business contact information for potential collaboration opportunities. Even our photographer received an inquiry from my mother about shooting the spring gala. Every vendor, every guest, every connection from our wedding had become a potential resource for my mother's social and professional network. She was treating our celebration like a trade show she had attended, mining it for contacts and opportunities without any recognition that this was deeply inappropriate. The pattern continued for months. Holiday cards arrived addressed to Jake and Emma Morrison with handwritten notes about how much she had enjoyed getting to know Jake's family and how she hoped we could all get together soon. She started following Jake's business social media accounts and commenting on his posts with the kind of enthusiastic support she had never shown for my achievements. But the most revealing incident occurred 4 months after our wedding, when Jake received a LinkedIn connection request from my mother along with a message. "Dear Jake, I so enjoyed meeting you at Emma's wedding and learning about your business. I'm always looking for smart young entrepreneurs to connect with my network. Would you be interested in being featured in our Historical Society newsletter as a young professional to watch?" Jake showed me the message with an expression of complete bewilderment. She's trying to use our marriage to build a professional relationship with me, he said. Like I'm a networking contact she met at a conference instead of her son-in-law. That's exactly how she sees you, I realized. You're not family to her. You're a business opportunity that happens to be married to her daughter. Jake declined the LinkedIn connection and didn't respond to her message. But the incident crystallized something important. My mother had never seen our wedding as a celebration of our love and commitment. She had seen it as a social and professional opportunity that she could leverage for her own benefit. Every person who attended, every vendor we hired, every family member she met, all of it was potential networking material for her various causes and committees. It was a level of transactional thinking that was almost breathtaking in its thoroughness. The final confrontation came exactly 1 year after our wedding, when my mother called to discuss anniversary plans. "Darling," she said when I answered the phone, "I've been thinking that it would be lovely to have an anniversary party for you and Jake. Something elegant at the country club. Maybe a cocktail reception for all the important people who couldn't make it to your original celebration." The suggestion was so perfectly characteristic that I almost laughed. She wanted to throw us an anniversary party that would essentially replace our wedding with the kind of event she would have planned originally. "We're not having an anniversary party, Mom?" Don't be silly. First anniversaries are very important. It's an opportunity to celebrate your marriage properly. We celebrated our marriage properly at our wedding. Well, yes, but that was such a small affair. I'm thinking something more substantial, more appropriate for a couple of your standing. There it was again. The assumption that our choices had been inadequate, that our preferences were insufficient, that our celebration needed to be improved or corrected according to her standards. "Mom," I said, feeling a familiar clarity settle over me, "I need you to understand something. Jake and I are not interested in the kind of life you're trying to create for us. We don't want country club memberships or society connections or networking opportunities. We want the life we've built together with the people we've chosen to include in it." "But darling, you're not thinking about your future. These connections matter. These relationships will benefit you professionally and socially." "No," I interrupted. "These connections matter to you. These relationships benefit your social standing and professional network. But they have nothing to do with what Jake and I want for our lives." "You're being very short-sighted. I'm being very clear about my boundaries. And here's what I need you to understand. If you continue trying to use our marriage as networking material, if you keep reaching out to our friends and vendors for your own purposes, if you don't stop treating our wedding like a business conference you attended, then you won't be part of our lives at all." The silence that followed was electric with shock. "You can't be serious," she said finally. "I have never been more serious about anything. I spent 32 years managing your expectations and accommodating your priorities. I spent decades making excuses for your behavior and convincing myself that your neglect was normal, but I'm done with all of that." My voice was steady, calm, completely free of the emotional turbulence that had characterized our interactions for so many years. "You have a choice to make, Mom. You can accept that Jake and I are adults who make our own decisions about our lives, our relationships, and our social activities. You can respect our boundaries and stop trying to use our marriage for your own benefit. You can learn to have a relationship with us based on mutual respect rather than your attempts to control and manage us." I paused, knowing that the next words would change everything between us. "Or you can continue behaving the way you have been, and you can do it without us in your life." "Emma, you're being completely unreasonable." "I'm being completely clear. Those are your options. Choose." She hung up without responding. That was 8 months ago. In all that time, I have received exactly 3 communications from my mother. A Christmas card with no personal message, a generic happy birthday text message, sent a day late, and a forwarded email about a charity auction that she apparently thought I might find interesting. I have not responded to any of them. The silence has been revelatory. No frantic phone calls trying to negotiate or manipulate. No dramatic emails about how I'm ruining the family. No attempts to reach out through other family members or mutual friends. Just nothing. Her lack of effort to repair our relationship has told me everything I needed to know about how she actually feels about losing me from her life. I was never important enough to fight for. I was never valuable enough to pursue. I was never loved enough to make the changes necessary to keep me. For 32 years, I had convinced myself that my mother's neglect was the result of being too busy, too important, too overwhelmed by her charitable work to properly focus on our relationship. But her response to my ultimatum revealed the truth. She had never prioritized me because she had never valued me. And strangely, that revelation brought me more peace than pain. Because in the silence left by her absence, I have been able to hear all the other voices in my life more clearly. Jake's daily expressions of love and support, Helen's regular check-ins and genuine interest in our lives, my friends' consistent presence and celebration of my happiness, my in-laws' warm inclusion of me in their family traditions and gatherings. I have learned what it feels like to be surrounded by people who show up consistently, who remember important dates without prompting, who celebrate my achievements without making them about themselves, who support my decisions, even when those decisions are different from what they would choose. I have learned what it feels like to be truly loved. Our first anniversary was everything our wedding had been: intimate, authentic, and focused on our actual relationship rather than external expectations. We spent the weekend at the same Vermont cabin where we had honeymooned, hiking through fall foliage and talking about our hopes for the coming year. No party, no networking opportunities, no social obligations, just the two of us, celebrating the life we had built together. It was perfect. As I write this, Jake and I have been married for 18 months. We're talking about buying a house, maybe starting a family in the next few years. We've built a life that reflects our values and priorities, surrounded by people who genuinely care about our happiness. Helen has become the maternal figure I always wanted but never had. She calls every few weeks just to check in, remembers details about our lives that my own mother never bothered to learn, and offers support without trying to control or manage our decisions. When we told her we were house hunting, she offered to help with the search. When I got a promotion at work, she sent flowers to my office with a note that said, "So proud of your success." The contrast with my mother's behavior has been illuminating. Helen's support comes without strings, without expectations, without hidden agendas. She celebrates our achievements because she genuinely cares about our happiness, not because our success reflects well on her or provides networking opportunities. Sometimes people ask if I miss my mother, if I regret the decision to cut contact, if I think I'll ever reconcile with her. The honest answer is no. I don't miss the anxiety of waiting for forgotten birthdays. I don't miss the exhaustion of managing her expectations and accommodating her social calendar. I don't miss the constant feeling that I wasn't important enough to remember, valuable enough to prioritize, or loved enough to fight for. What I miss is the mother I always hoped she could become, someone who would show up consistently, celebrate my happiness unconditionally, and love me for who I actually am rather than who she wanted me to be. But that person never existed. I was mourning a relationship that I had imagined, rather than grieving the loss of something real. The woman who forgot my birthday for the last time was the same woman who had been demonstrating my lack of importance to her for 32 years. The only thing that changed was my willingness to accept that treatment. I learned that you can't force someone to value you. You can't convince someone to prioritize you. You can't manage your way into being loved by someone who has chosen not to love you. But you can choose to surround yourself with people who do value you, who do prioritize you, who do love you exactly as you are. You can choose to build a life that reflects your own worth rather than waiting for someone else to recognize it. You can choose to create the family you deserve rather than settling for the family you were born into. On my 33rd birthday, the first one since I stopped having contact with my mother, Jake surprised me with a small party that included all the people who actually matter in our lives. Helen flew in from Portland. My college friends drove up from the city. Jake's family joined us for dinner and cake. At exactly midnight, as my birthday was ending, I realized something beautiful. Not once during the entire day had I thought about my mother's absence. Not once had I felt the familiar anxiety of waiting for a call that wouldn't come or hoping for recognition that wouldn't arrive. Instead, I had spent the day feeling completely celebrated, entirely valued, and deeply loved by people who had chosen to show up for me consistently. That night, as Jake and I cleaned up the remnants of my birthday celebration, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for what I had lost, but for what I had gained. I had gained the clarity to recognize love when I saw it. I had gained the strength to walk away from people who diminished my worth. I had gained the wisdom to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. Most importantly, I had gained the peace that comes from knowing that I am surrounded by people who will never forget my birthday because they will never forget that I matter. My mother forgot my birthday for the last time on March 15th, 2 years ago. And in forgetting, she gave me the greatest gift she had ever given me, the final push I needed to build a life without her in it. It was the best decision I ever made.